Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapist Theater. My name is Josh Treese, and I'm coming to you from Music City, USA, with the podcast that takes a look at relationships and mental health through the lens of movies, TV, and pop culture. Do any of you guys have issues with re-entry when you get back from vacation? That's where we're at right now. We spent a week at the beach with Leigh-Ann's family, and then the weekend with my family, and after getting back sometime Sunday evening, I was not ready to jump back into the real world. Shoot us an email at therapisttheater@gmail.com and let us know your best hacks for re-entering the real world after vacation, because I need them. This week's guest is Cody Higgs. Cody is a counselor in Franklin, Tennessee, who specializes in working with teen girls and young women. I was so happy to get the chance to learn from him, and I loved our conversation. I'm sure that you'll think the same thing. So let's jump right in. Dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Well, Cody, welcome to the theater. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on today. I like to start out asking everybody on the show, why therapy? Why is it that you do this thing that you do?
All right. I'll probably give you the long answer.
That's cool.
That's a better story. So ultimately it's because when I was younger, teenager, I had folks help me. And after a while, it sort of got in my mind that maybe that's what I would like to do for other teenagers. So I got in plenty of trouble when I was a younger guy. But, I was able to look at it and say I wasn't just angry or just a troublemaker. There was, lots of emotion under all those behaviors and under all of the anger that showed at the top. And I like helping kids with those other emotions. And I mean, from the time I was 16, I decided right then that's what I would do. And right at 16, I decided that I would work with angry teenage guys, since I still pretty much was one. And that's what I started out working with. And I guess in my second role, which is what I did until private practice, I got placed working with teenage girls and felt like I was going to be completely lost, and started working with those girls, and they made progress so much quicker than most of the guys that I've worked with, or most of the guys with behavioral and anger management issues anyway. And that's when I sort of decided that that's the path I would go down. So now I work with a lot of anxious teenage girls that don't feel so great about themselves.
Yeah. Going back, you said when you were like 15 or 16, some people stepped in to help you out.
Yeah.
Were those therapists? Like, did you start as a client back then?
Yeah, so I had, it was probably when I was a little bit younger, around 13, that I started as a client. And I had one or two therapists, in my teenage years. But I managed to achieve getting in enough trouble at one point that I got grounded for a month, and said and did a lot of things that weren't so smart after I got grounded, and was able to have the opportunity to go live in a cabin in the wilderness. And
I like how you're framing this positively. I had the opportunity to go and
right. Well, this is what some people pay like $1,000 a week to go do for a vacation, but
yeah.
Actually, I'm sure it costs more than $1,000 a week if you're getting therapy for getting in a lot of trouble while you're there. But yeah, as it turned out, I went to was basically sort of, it's like long-term residential semi-wilderness setting. And honestly, we didn't get a ton of interaction with actual mental health counselors there, but the staff that were there would come stay with us for 3.5 days. So we were with each other 24 hours a day for 3.5 days at a time. And those staff made a big difference for me. And we got to, and I'm not telling my story in a ton of detail right now, but we got to know them and their entire story.
Yeah.
And most of them had been through, plenty, like all of us guys had, and
So these were adults that would come in, develop a relationship with you, and show you that they cared about you, and even shared, hey, this is where I come from.
Yeah.
Probably as a way to say, like, this is why I care.
Yes. Yeah.
And that just left an impact on you.
It really did. And that they weren't therapists.
Yeah.
It just left me going, wow, I could help people, make
had
a big difference.
I had a guest on a few weeks ago, Lucy Davidson Wright. She worked at a place like that in Texas called Heartlight, where I think it was exclusively with girls, though. But she was out there for a few years doing that before she came out here and did grad school and got into the clinical kind of role. So you realized not too long after that it had impacted you, and you kind of wanted to give back just out of curiosity, because this is kind of like a part of my story too. Was there any part of that was, those guys that came and stayed in the house with you? Like, I look up to them. I really like them. I want to be like them.
Yeah, there was. Yeah, for sure. And, we didn't end up learning a lot about their personal life after they were older, I guess. Like, they shared the parts with us that were really relevant to what we were going through. There's one of them who would call his wife every now and then and complain about how we were acting, which I'm sure had a purpose. But we didn't learn a ton about how they were at that point, but we more saw that in them. So we didn't have to hear a lot about their personal life, but we saw the way that they lived and the way they went about their decision making, and I think that was as helpful as anything. And that's something that I really learned is important to do in therapy too, is where you can do therapy as much as you want to. You also have to show kids a good model for, even things like healthy boundaries and what a good relationship looks like, and how to set limits with people, and how to not just look at your accomplishments, but to be able to see who you are as a person and just your qualities. And those are things that you can't necessarily teach. Like, you can say, do this, and then somebody may or may not do it, but I feel like it's a different level when someone sees you doing that.
So it sounds, at least to me, like when you have, for lack of a better term, a group home setting where there's adults with the kids for extended periods of time, those kinds of things you just talked about, the modeling aspect, would be a little bit easier to show compared to a 50-minute clinical session. Like, in a session kind of way, can you maybe tell me, like, what are some ways that you can do those kinds of things, that you can model? Is it just something that happens in the long term over the course of a relationship, or?
Yeah, I feel like it. I definitely feel like that's something that happens more over the long term. Even doing things like not answering a text message at midnight that says, I was broken up with and I need to talk about it. if you answer that right then, that is not a good job of modeling good boundaries. So, waiting until the next day at 8 a.m. and, giving a call and saying, wow, I'm sorry, that must really suck. I'm assuming you want to talk about it. Like, what's a good time for us to talk?
Yeah.
So yeah, modeling that, but also, when I've got a girl sitting in here and her phone's constantly going off, she's like, my boyfriend won't leave me alone, or my ex-boyfriend won't leave me alone. And working through that, like, okay, well, do you feel like you need to answer it right now? Why do you feel like you need to answer it right now? And do you feel comfortable turning the phone off? And, if they're like, well, I want to turn it off, but then I think I can't because they said X, Y, or Z, going through, like, whose responsibility is that for what they do? Is it yours or theirs?
Yeah.
And, I feel like that's a good, probably more an example of normalizing the not wanting to answer the phone, and normalizing, I know it feels like your responsibility, but in the end, who's going to decide what your boyfriend does, and who's going to decide what you do?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's another part of it, is just being able to say, yeah, it's a struggle and it sucks, and something we all end up asking ourselves.
Yeah. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that it's not necessarily like wanting to model those things you talked about, a bullet pointable plan that you can walk into a session and say, today I'm going to model these 3 things.
Right.
It's more along the lines of like being really present with a client,
Yeah.
having that therapeutic relationship,
Right.
and then as it moves forward, being, I don't know if being comfortable is the right word, because that's the whole point of building the relationship, but certainly being okay with like confronting the client with, hey, this is our time together. I see your phone is, so maybe just challenging them on things, and
Yeah.
and then, but not in a combative way.
Right.
More like in a, I'm with you in this. It's you and me walking this together. Let's talk about.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I always believe if a kid is answering their phone in session, like, there's a reason for that. So I don't ever go put your phone away.
Yeah.
Like, if there's a reason you feel like you need to answer your phone, that's fine. And sometimes I'll be like, wow, you're popular today. And they'll be like, oh yeah, it's this group of friends that's texting me. So if it's a kid with severe social anxiety who doesn't talk to their friends, I'm like, fine, I can wait 10 seconds for you to answer your friend, and we can talk about what we're talking about. Or we can talk about how awesome it is that you feel comfortable participating in a group text message now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I know it's, for the longest, it was my natural inclination to go, no, we can't play with cell phones in appointments. But there's a reason. For some kids, that's what they focus on. Like, they may play a game while we talk, and it works completely fine.
It's like a fidget.
Yeah, it is. And so now I've got Edge here now.
Yeah.
So
He's our third guest in the
right.
in the room right now.
Completely silent.
Yeah. Well, not completely.
Well,
he's snoring hard next to me. Yeah.
Oh, he hasn't even started snoring hard. But,
really?
He wakes me up in the middle of the night sometimes. Yeah.
Sometimes when I wake my wife up in the middle of the night snoring, I'll blame it on the dog.
That's a good. I can't believe for 12 years I have not thought about that.
I also didn't know that I snored until we got married.
Yeah, me neither.
Which I guess, how could you?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the empathy and the desire to connect with your clients is just coming through in everything you're saying.
Yeah.
Because I think it would be really easy to take like a very cold clinical position of, these are the rules of my office, no phones.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so you're either going to jive with that or we're not going to be able to meet.
Right.
And I don't know if that, especially with the population that you said you work with, I don't know if that would really fly.
I mean, it would work really well for getting kids to not come to therapy anymore.
Yeah.
It would work wonders for that. But I prefer them to like come to therapy and like coming to therapy.
Well, therapy certainly works better when they show up.
I mean, I've found that so far.
I wonder, do you find in taking a position that is a little more empathetic and understanding, I would even say curious. Hey, what is it that you're feeling so important to answer the phone right now? Do you find that by taking that position, you know, you're able to create the type of relationship where the phone kind of naturally gets tucked away a little more?
Yeah, I think so.
That's cool.
I do. It's the funniest thing to me. Like somebody, they'll even leave their phone on vibrate, and you know, like pull out their phone and turn off what, I don't know, you know, phones have a million different settings now, but they'll pull out their phone, do whatever, turn off vibrate and stick it back in their pocket and be like, I'm sorry. Like, you don't have to be sorry.
Yeah.
My phone does that in session every now and then. I have to take it out and switch it, you know. Honestly, now that I think about it, probably parents' phones go off a larger percentage of the time in session than teenagers do. But yeah, I mean, like I said, though, for some kids, if they're getting a group text and actually answering it, that's a big deal. So, you know, they'll be like, well, I'll answer it later, and I just go, well, you need to answer it now. Like, feel free. It's not going to hurt my feelings. I'll still be here when you get done.
Yeah. That sounds like, it reminds me of, I do a lot of work with addicts. Yeah. And it sounds like something that we kind of do, just teaching surrender. So like if you've got a thought or a desire or a feeling that, you know, you may have the temptation to fight. No, I can't feel that way. I can't feel that way. Rather than doing that, just kind of surrendering to it. I am afraid. Yeah. You know, and rather than fighting it, like acknowledging it, engaging it, and seeing what it's trying to tell you. And then really through that, it kind of takes away its power. Yeah. You know, I said to somebody, I think yesterday, maybe a client, I used the scene from, I think it's the first Harry Potter, where they fall into the vines, and the more they fight, the tighter they constrict them until they just kind of go limp and relax, and they just fall straight through to the next level of the quest that they're on, you know? Yep. Like you just kind of quit fighting it, and it just kind of naturally kind of takes care of itself. Yeah. You mentioned parents in session, which I think is interesting. So, you know, you said you work a lot with young ladies that are dealing with these things. Are their parents in session with them? Is that a special occasion that they come in, or?
That really, and this is a question from parents a lot when we start out, was how often do you have parents in? And, or, you know, do you have parents and kids meet together? And that differs so much from person to person, because kid A may do fine coming in every time by themselves, and I touch base with parents every couple of months. And kid B, like, we may need to have family sessions every other week. And kid C, you know, maybe I need to meet with parents for the first 15 minutes of each session, and then meet with kid for the rest of session. But yeah, I feel like that ends up being in every combination you could think of.
Yeah. How do you handle confidentiality with a client who is a minor?
That gets really tricky, especially in Tennessee, because things change a little bit at 16. Kids can technically sign themselves up for therapy and don't need parental approval. Since I've been in private practice, I pretty much require that parents give consent for a kid to come to therapy, unless there's some really obvious reason that, like, kids need to come by themselves. But that hasn't happened in the past 5 years.
Yeah. But like you mentioned that occasionally you might connect with a parent every couple months, or
Right.
maybe sometimes at the beginning of a session. Are you sharing with them the things that the client is sharing with you, or is it just kind of progress milestones?
Well, so I always tell kids, I tell kids and parents in the first session every time that I can always tell parents, like what general progress has been, generally what we're working on. If your kids come into session and if your kids participating when they come, or if they stare at the floor and don't talk most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things I can always tell. And then I tell teenagers too, like I want to, if there's something that I can tell your parents that I feel really strongly is going to help you out, like usually a way, like something that they can do that's going to be good for you, that's really specific, then, I may need to share more specific information that you've given me. But I'm always going to check with you before I share that really specific information, and whether I think it's going to be good for you or not. If you absolutely tell me no, then I'm not going to.
So they're kind of in the driver's seat.
Yeah, and it's not. I know some parents feel. Is he snoring too loud?
No,
Okay.
It's literally like it's my dream. This is great. If I could have him curled up like a baby in my lap, I would.
All right, you can. So I know that some parents get worried when you say, like, I'm going to have to restrict some information. But if a kid doesn't want you to tell that information and then you go ahead and do it, or if they feel like you told it behind their back, or like you betrayed their trust, sometimes counseling's done at that point, really, as far as a kid's concerned. And other times it can set things so far back that it really has an adverse effect.
You're almost back at the beginning, and you got to start joining all over again.
Yeah, or you've got to start joining from a point now of a kid who trusts you less than when they started, when you were a complete stranger.
Yeah.
Like now you're someone who tricked them into trusting you, and then you
Betrayed it.
did something that you told them you wouldn't, and you're having to start back. Like now you've got one strike.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to what you said about just modeling, healthy boundaries and how to have a good relationship.
Yeah.
And that's really part of how you do that is just treating the kid, the client, and behaving in a way that is healthy. Like,
and to be clear, if a kid says, I'm going to harm myself, like there's not a question. I'm going to let parents know.
That goes back to like the three kind of guiding rules about, when it comes to informed consent. In like my sessions, I always say everything you say in here is confidential with 3 exceptions. Mm-hmm. If I believe, and I say that on purpose, if I believe that you have intent to harm yourself, I'm going to break that confidentiality and get you the help you need. If I believe that you have intent to harm another person, including an elder person or a child, I'm going to break that confidentiality, get you the help you need. And if a court of law subpoenas me or my records to appear before them, I'm going to cooperate with whatever they want. But so it's not like total consent, I said, but confidentiality, but the purpose behind all of that is to look out for your best. It's never, I'm gonna go tell this because it's a juicy, whatever. It's more like, I don't want you to be hurt. That's the main thing behind that. But what I hear, you kind of saying, which I think is super interesting because you're an LPC. So I've sat with a couple of different LPCs on the show who have varying understandings of systems thinking. But I mean, it just sounds like you're not just thinking of the kid as an individual on an island, but you are thinking about the family. Like even saying, hey, if there's something that I think can really help you and your family, I'd love to share that with them if you're okay with it.
Well, yeah, and so much of it is insight into, like we see these behavior, and I've got a 4-year-old. This happens to me at home a lot. Like we see these behaviors, and it's like getting angry or being really smart aleck or not wanting to get up in the morning or staying in bed all weekend or not getting homework done or doing homework and not turning it in. Like which you would go, why? Why would you do it and not turn it in? And it's been sitting in your notebook for 3 weeks. But we see those behaviors and we go like angry, lazy, unmotivated, and that's what we see. So that's what we go, okay, their problem is they're angry, they're disrespectful, they're lazy, they're unmotivated, and it's the fault of social media. It's a lot of times where things go. So, but that's just what we see. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's a lot, actually the movie that we were talking about today, they give such good, realistic examples of what's going on under those behaviors. And I can look back to me in, middle and high school and go, wow, that was the same thing with me. And it's the same thing with so many teenagers that, like, maybe all of a sudden they have trouble paying attention in class and getting homework done because there are things that are going on in their mind that are really difficult to process, and that's what's on their mind. Like when you're having trouble figuring out how to feel decent, then honors algebra 2 is probably not top priority.
Yeah.
Or when you're snapping at your parents, but underneath that you feel nervous all the time about anything or about nothing. Mm-hmm. And that cortisol level is so high, and your stress is up all the time, then probably somebody being like, hey, are you listening to me while you're trying to listen to music and calm down a little bit? You're going to go, God, just leave me alone. Leave me alone. I'm listening to music.
Yeah.
So what we see on the surface, it's kind of like what took down the Titanic, right? Mm-hmm. It's everything underneath it that they didn't see.
Yeah, I had somebody, when I first started therapy as a client many years ago, somebody say to me, you want to find a therapist who, when you tell them why you want to come in, they treat that as symptoms, not as a disease.
Right.
So they're willing to take that in, go deeper,
right,
see what it is underneath that's causing those things to kind of happen.
Yeah.
And it I think I hear the empathy from you coming through again, because like you're describing behaviors that I think any parent would just look at and go, hey, get your act together.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing?
Which is natural, right?
Yeah.
I know I always sound like I shouldn't say I always sound, but sometimes I probably sound to some parents like I'm just dogging parents. But I mean, this happens to me at home too. Like I'm getting, yelled at about like stop pulling the dog's ears, and I'm getting screamed at by a 4-year-old who thinks he's 10 feet tall, and like that's what's happening. I'm not thinking about everything that's going on under that. I'm thinking about getting yelled at.
Yeah.
So sometimes I take a time out and I'm going, okay, don't go in the bedroom. We're going to shut the door. We're going to let Edge take a break for a minute.
Yeah.
And, I'm going to go sit over here and here's your book. Mm-hmm. Because at that moment, it's going to save so much trouble for me to just take.
Well, that's even recognizing that there's something going on inside of you in that
moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not, which is a systems thing. It's not just the quote unquote symptom bearer. It's not just the kid pulling the dog's ears, but it's dad's response to it and Edge's response to it,
Well, and I think too, a lot of this goes back to like how we've dealt with stress I think this doesn't matter on how you feel like the world came to be, but at one point something was trying to eat people, right? Like people were having to run from things trying to eat them. And that a lot of that stress and that cortisol build up in your body was telling you like, hey, if you're going to die, run away. And so I feel like that's still like sort of ingrained in us that like when we get that stress, like we need to do something about it right then. There's not time to think about it. We need to handle it. Well, and actually, Edge is a really good example on a basic level. Edge has Cushing's disease, which actually is a brain tumor, but it pushes on his pituitary gland and makes his body make like 10 times the amount of cortisol that it's supposed to. He has medicine for it, and it's all good, and they said he'll live a full, healthy life. But before we knew what it was, he was constantly drinking water and eating food. He would wake up at 2 a.m. and drink a full bowl of water. And anything, I mean, if something smelled like food, he would just go sit in front of you until you we don't give it to him, but wanting you to give it to him. But I mean, that's sort of like where our stress takes us initially is I've got to handle the problem. Mm-hmm. And if a teenager being smart with you is the problem, then you're like, that's the problem.
Yeah.
We don't naturally take time to look at the emotions that are going under that or the life circumstances.
Yeah. And I'd like to say that this is just the case with teenagers, but I think it's the case with a lot of adults too.
Yeah,
we haven't been given the words or the understanding to know all the time what's going on inside of ourselves when that's happening.
Right.
And so part of, any kind of therapy is a little bit of psychoeducation to just say, hey, when you're experiencing this, this is what's going on.
Right.
Now let's work on ways to address what's happening rather than kind of the instinctual kind of, because like that cortisol dump you were talking about, I've said before, our bodies can't tell the difference between tangible danger and intangible danger. So they can't tell the difference between the bear that's running up trying to eat you and you're nervous that your girlfriend's going to break up with you.
Exactly.
And so the physical response is the same.
Yeah.
And when that cortisol hits, the adrenaline comes in, the heart rate increases, the pupils dilate, you got more energy, you're hyper aware.
You would think after all these years, our bodies would have naturally figured it out, but generation by generation, but apparently not.
Yeah, but I think that when it comes to dealing with that, it's not like we naturally get better at that when we become adults.
Right. Yeah.
I think because there's no not milestone. What's the word I'm thinking of? Rite of passage that we go through where somebody goes, and here is your adult kit. Right. You will be able to deal with all of your emotions. And
well, and I feel like, I hope that's going in a positive direction now, in that I get the question. I mean, this question will come from parents and kids and doctors and teachers. Is do you feel like there are more mental health issues now than there were 20 years ago, or why are there more mental health issues now than 20? But I'm not sure that there are. I mean, I think we're more emotionally in tune. But when we're more emotionally in tune, you hope that generation by generation, people will more naturally be able to look under that one thing.
I think it's that, and I think that there's been more research and work done to where we know how much emotional work, mental health care, therapeutic work can benefit a person, and we have so much more evidence and ways to help than we did before. And I mean, the best example that I can think of is my little brother has autism. He was born in 1986. No, 1987. And the amount of resources that they had for somebody dealing with that back then were so minuscule compared to what they have today. Right. And it's not I think it's a bit like a snake eating its own tail. It's not like awareness increased, which birthed that. I think some of it is people doing research and work helped increase awareness, and some of it is awareness increased and helped put in people the desire to do research and work. And and the result is we have the ability to help people more,
Mm-hmm.
than we did in the past.
Yeah. 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 And like I liked, I guess the positive side, the optimistic side of me likes to think that things will continue going that direction for, like, I mean, any type of mental health, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And my hope is that, with the work that you're doing with young people, they're going to grow up having that awareness, having more tools
Right.
than you or I did.
Right. Yeah.
I first became a client in therapy when I was 33.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was in high school being, angry and scared. And at one point, my mom even saying, we need to take you to somebody that you can talk to, professional. And I was like, I am not doing that. Because I thought, well, that means that I'm broken. That means that I'm crazy.
Yeah. Do you get that question a lot? Am I crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too.
Which I think that's the benefit of, like, in session normalization is to let people know. I had somebody ask me over text last night, hey, this is how I'm feeling. Is that normal for somebody in the early 30s? And my first thought to type back was, I don't like the word normal, maybe typical and all that. But then I just thought, whatever. And I just wrote back, I was.
Yeah, right.
I mean, because at that point, I think that's almost more powerful.
Yeah.
Just in the sense of, I don't know if it was normal or typical, but I know that I was.
Yeah.
And so, I know what you're experiencing. I know what you're going through, and I can tell you that it is possible to find help, and it's possible to move past it, because I did.
Right.
But I would hope that as young people are coming up and they have more awareness than we did, and they have more tools and access to those tools than we did, that everything would increase, like people's ability to seek help, their desire to seek help, and their ability to communicate to others, hey, you're not alone, and it is possible to keep going. Yeah.
That's well, and that's something that I feel like the girl, Kayla, I think was her, in the movie, she's, throughout the movie, you see how she tries to take the things that she's dealing with and help other people with them, even though those are still issues that she's very much dealing with, and she doesn't really know how to, but that's like the way that she copes is trying to help other people. And it's cool that you see by the end of the movie, she's starting to figure things out, and is able to actually, I guess, start doing that in the way that she had wanted to.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk movies. So what we mentioned a little bit, we gave a little tiny hint, but what movie did you bring for us to talk about today?
8th grade.
8th grade. I don't even know if there's a more fitting movie with what you do.
Yeah.
And you had said something along the lines of you knew about the movie, but you'd kind of tucked it away. I'm going to watch this one day.
Yeah.
So you have done so much work with young women, and then you see this movie. What was it about this movie? What does this movie mean to you? What does it say to you?
I guess I should say the reason I didn't watch it for so long was I thought it would be like a movie that was similar to 13 Reasons Why for middle schoolers. And while I watch all of the 13 Reasons Why episodes, because they do show so many realistic issues that teenagers go through that parents a lot of times don't have a clue teenagers are going through. So I honestly think 13 Reasons Why is probably more useful for parents to watch than teenagers. But sorry, way off topic. But and Edge is turning up the volume.
He's sawing logs. Yeah, he is.
Yeah, he can still get louder. He's at a 3 right now.
Ooh.
This movie though, I feel like it was listed as a comedy when I went to when I went to download it. I think I told you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely not like I wasn't busting out with laughter the entire time.
There's funny parts, but
Funny
it's
parts.
not
It's more like
overall.
awkward funny parts,
Yeah.
right? Like things that actually happen in middle and high school, which to me, I guess, may lose some of the humor because I get to hear the emotions behind when those
Mm-hmm.
things happen, and a lot of times they're not very good emotions. So yeah, I guess the reason I chose it, well, we discussed it, and then you brought it up, and I was like, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
This is a time like I'll emotionally invest in this movie for a couple hours. I thought it did a really good job, again, of showing things that teenagers see and do every day that a lot of times only teenagers know that are going on every day. And it does a really good job too of showing like the stressful stuff that they see and do, and the emotions that result from those stressful things, and then how they interact with adults after going through those stressful things.
Yeah.
And I can think of
Or even in this, sometimes while they're in the middle
wow,
of,
yeah, right. Yeah, I'm thinking of a part where Kayla and her dad, and all this takes place like in the last 2 weeks of 8th grade.
Yeah.
So she and her dad are sitting at the dinner table, and she's listening to music on her phone and looking at something.
Headphones in.
Right, yeah, headphones in. And he says something to her, and she was like, "Yeah, that's cool," and like goes to put her headphone in. He's like, "Well, can I just tell you one thing?" She's like, "Sure, just go ahead." And so he rattles off like 4 things. He's like, "You said one thing." He's like, "Well, I mean, it's one chunk of things." And so she goes to put her headphones back in again, and he's like, "Oh, well, I mean, I think 9th grade will be good." And she's like, "Mm-hmm." And like just starts going, "Yeah, cool," to whatever he's saying. But, she snaps at him like pretty good a couple of times. But what the movie enlightens you to is the day that she's had before that, or the few days that she's had before that, and things that happened that afternoon when she was leaving school, and what was going on, what she was looking at and thinking about right before coming to dinner. And you get all that context, and you're like, no wonder she was grouchy.
Yeah.
Right?
Which kind of goes to like, who was it? Terry Murphy, when she was on the show, said everybody makes sense in the context of their own story.
Right.
So it gives you that context and that story to
Right.
know, oh, she's not a jerk.
Right.
She's just somebody who her head is filled with this stuff right
Yeah,
now that she's
yeah.
trying to. It's like it's like an old processor in a computer. She's doing her best to like
Right.
churn through and deal with that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of times we ask kids to deal with things that adults have trouble dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, as adults, if we're like looking for love and looking for acceptance and scared to death of what's going to happen in a couple months, and those things stay on our mind and churn and churn and churn, and then that turns into stress from the time we wake up till the time we go to sleep. I mean, like, we'll probably be grouchy.
Yeah.
The adults I work with
Not probably.
are
I mean,
grouchy,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I get grouchy when I'm in a situation where I've got 5 different big life stressors. And yeah.
So
I guess I should add, I'm not grouchy in counseling sessions. I don't snap at clients and chew people out for no reason.
but you have a general awareness of grouchiness and how
Yeah,
it can.
yeah.
So in the movie, Kayla is her dad is. Her mom left, I think, but it's just her and her dad at the house.
Yeah, that's what they say. So her mom left.
Yeah. And her dad especially at the end when they're sitting in
Mhm.
front of the fire. It's so obvious how much he loves her
Yeah.
and how much he likes her.
Yeah.
And even at that dinner table scene you described, which is at the beginning of the movie,
Yeah.
I kind of got the sense that maybe Dad had just been wanting to talk to her so much,
Right.
so that when she kind of cracked the door a little bit for him to do it,
Yeah.
that's why it was 5, 6,
Yeah.
7 things all at once, because
Right.
I don't know when I'm going to get the chance to
Right.
talk to you again, so I gotta.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's such a tough thing for parents, is that, man, I mean, when you have a teenager, like, there are so many of these things that you want to share, and a lot of times they're not willing to listen to it. So when you can catch them and you think they might be willing to listen to something, you try to get all that out there. But the way I explain it a lot of times is, it's like if someone gives you a hug and they squeeze you so tight and you're like, you just said a hug, and they're like, yes, this is a big hug. Right?
Bear hug.
Yeah, you're like, I'm loving this. And they're like, yeah, I'm not.
I'm dying.
Right. Yeah. And that's, and I also tell parents I dread being a parent of a teenager, because it's going to be tough. But so I know that's one thing parents always want to get that stuff in. So I work with parents a lot on offering support and then waiting until your kid is ready for you to give them that support.
Hey, everybody. This is Josh, and I'm interrupting the episode to ask for your help in getting more people into the theater. Do you have a favorite episode of Therapist Theater? Take a second and find it in your podcast app right now. Now, hit the share button and send it to a friend that you think would also enjoy it. The best way to help us on our mission to make mental health more accessible and understood is to share Therapist Theater with others. Thanks so much for listening. Back to the show.
Like, they'll be ready eventually, but if you're throwing support at them all the time, then they're probably just going to be like, leave me alone.
Yeah. I had a mentor who worked with teenagers and their parents a lot, who said that there's a couple of like life stage shifts that go on that parents sometimes have a difficult time. Like when a kid is born, like infancy and childhood, you really have total control. Like, you're determining when they eat, what what they dress like, what they do,
Right.
that kind of stuff. Then, teenage years, high school, you're acting as like a coach. So like, they're in the game, they're the ones that, have cleats on, that are running the plays, and you're on the sideline and you're giving direction, but you're giving it from afar.
Right.
And then, at some point, probably college, maybe later, you move into more of a consultant role.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas you're there, you're available,
Right.
but you're not they come to you when they need it.
Right.
Kind of thing. Yeah. And he always said that this shift from control to coach is pretty easy for most parents, but the shift from coach to consultant is really tough.
Right.
And my guess is because you're struggling with that natural transition of the kid leaving the nest.
Right.
And am I not needed anymore?
Right.
Do they not want to be around me? Do they not like me?
Yeah.
I need to prove my worth by offering
Right.
this knowledge or this experience or my thoughts.
Right.
Kind of thing. But it's just a developmental thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's that's what you try to explain, right? That natural development happens, and a lot of times I think teenagers, they feel like an adult in a lot of ways, but then there's so many adulting things that they're scared of.
There's so many adulting things I'm scared of.
Yeah. Yeah. But we'll just say this as teenagers, right?
Yeah,
Because we're going to be
yeah.
adults and act like we know everything to do.
Well, maybe that's the issue, though, is that like there's so many adults that act like we know what we're doing.
Yeah.
When the truth is, it's a best guess scenario. Like,
Yeah, I mean, no, well, and this is like where anxiety comes from, right? Like nothing in life is for sure. And the quick fix to anxiety is to get control of things.
yeah.
I work with a lot of anxious parents because you can't control your kid. You can lock them in their room, I guess, and control them that way. But short of that, they're developing an adult mind.
Yeah. But I think the example you're giving is you could attempt to kind of literally and physically control them, but that's not really what you want. That's not really the end goal.
No, and that will cause long-term damage to a relationship too.
Yeah.
And you may have a really passive kid who just says, "Okay, I'll do exactly what you tell me to." But that's, again, that's will most likely be, there will be an effect on a long-term relationship that you have with your teenager. If you've got a 16-year-old who just goes, "Okay, yes, I'll do that."
Well, I can't think of a more difficult tension to sit with inside of yourself than, as a parent, looking at your kid who in whatever situation could get hurt, emotionally could fail, which is going to cause sadness, shame, guilt, whatever, and having to wrestle with, do I let them fail? Do I let them get hurt?
Right.
Not harmed,
Right.
but hurt.
Right.
Or do I step in and intervene?
Right.
Because it'd be like if a mama bird, let a baby bird sit on her back the whole time it's growing up.
Right.
And then one day the mama bird's not around, but that baby bird doesn't know how to fly.
Right. Yeah.
At a certain point, it is the things that we go through that are difficult that's how we learn how to be people.
Well, all the research shows that the lessons that we learn the hard way are the lessons that stick with us the best.
But I can't imagine as a parent, like, being present and witnessing and seeing my kid wrestle with that.
Yeah.
And knowing what the right move is.
Yep.
Like.
but how many times are you going to tell a teenager, you need to do this in your relationship with your boyfriend, and they'll just go, "Oh yeah, that makes complete sense." Right?
Even if they do say that, they're not going to do it. Like,
no, I was a school-based therapist for several years with Centerstone, and I got to fill in for my boss while she was on maternity leave at a particular school, and the principal there had been the principal at my school when I was in high school, and had chewed me out fairly.
I was going to say, did he know you?
Yeah, and had known my parents my entire life. I mean, we're from Columbia, Tennessee. I grew up there when everybody really knew everybody. It's not a big town now, but it was a lot smaller when I was growing up. So yeah, he knew me and my family well. So, I'm at this school, and I was always there on Fridays. So I'm walking out, and I was like, "All right, Coach Wright, I'll see you later." I still called him Coach Wright because he was a football coach. And he was like, "Hey, come here for a second." It's like, I'm 30 years old getting called into the principal's office on Friday afternoon. But he was like, "I just wanted to ask you something." It's like, "Did your parents ever get any smarter?" But I mean, it's like valid question from when I was like 16 or 17 years old, right? And I was like, yes, they got a lot smarter. But most 16 and 17-year-olds think their parents don't know anything.
Yeah.
And that's when you try to give a kid who's just figured out that they can think independently an order to do something, and you treat it like that's the only option, they're just going to say no. And that's why you have to wait until they're ready to hear it.
Yeah. And I think you highlighted something that's super interesting, and that I think I remember yelling at my mom when I was a kid, that a lot of times when parents talk to a kid, I remember my mom saying something to me along the lines of like, well, you don't have any real problems. I'm the one that's paying the bills and I've got this. And I remember yelling back at her, the problems that I have are real to me.
Yeah.
Like it's my world.
Yeah.
It's my whole world.
Yeah.
And they're a real thing.
Right.
You know, and so I think that, which therapeutically saying something like that, you go like, wow, you're just like invalidating all of their experience and everything that means anything to them.
And I don't think parents mean to do that though. They mean to go like, you know, hey, you would feel better if you looked at this way. But you can't just say that.
Yeah. Well, you can, but they can't hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. What they're trying to say is like, you know, when you're an adult, what happens your sophomore year of high school isn't going to be on your mind.
Yeah.
You know, but nobody can ever get out of their present moment. Like that's where they're at. That's their life. That's their world.
And I think a good demonstration of that was, you know, one time I was working with a senior in high school, and it was like the last quarter was starting. So this is the last quarter of their last year in school. And I was like, man, you're like you're almost there, almost to the end. And they were like, no, I mean, there's 9 weeks left. Like that's how much it sticks with them when you go, you know, it's like, this is not going to matter after you get out of school.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like when I get out of school, you mean forever from now?
Yeah. I read an article one time that talked about, you know how it feels like the older you get, it's like time passes as if you're in a wagon going downhill. It just goes faster and faster and faster. And this article said something about it's because of how long you've lived. So like for us, 9 weeks is a really tiny amount of time,
right.
But it's a significantly bigger chunk of a 17-year-old's life than it is to a 37-year-old's life.
Right.
You know?
Well, and when you're 17, since 5 years old, you have been on the same schedule your entire life.
Yeah.
You go to, you get up, you go to school, you come home, you do homework, you live for the weekend, and then you go back to school. Right? That's you've been on that. And I think at some point it's like, I'm just going to be in this grind for forever.
You don't know how the life could look any different.
No. And you didn't choose that, like, to go to school. You know, it's just like what you do. Like we chose to be therapists.
Yeah.
You know, I think if we had woken up, and somebody was like, hey, for the next 12 years, you're going to be a therapist. Have fun. Like, some people, that's great. And others are like, no, I don't talk about feelings every day.
Yeah.
This is irrelevant to what I want to do for the rest of my life. How often do you hear that? I'm not going to use algebra when I'm 30 years old.
That's true.
Right?
And you won't. Nobody does.
No. The closest I got was in a stats class. But like for research methods, because and I love that because I'm a research nerd. But I think that's about as like. No offense to any of the algebra. I had some really good algebra.
But give me a break. High school math teacher. I do carry a calculator with me everywhere I go. It's in my phone.
They didn't have those.
That'll show you. Yeah, but they had calculator watches.
Yeah. Yes.
Which I got in trouble. I was in an Algebra 2 class, and I got the teacher called my name, called me to the front of the class, and ripped up my paper because I was doing. I wish I could say I was doing algebra on my watch. I was doing addition, like I was adding double-digit numbers because I didn't want to do it on the paper. And she ripped up the thing in front of the class. She did let me take it over again for half credit, but after that, you better believe I never even looked at that watch in that class again.
Well, we would set our scientific calculators. You could load games onto them.
Yeah. Oh, I did that during my SAT.
I fell asleep in my ACT.
Yeah.
They had it. For a bunch of 17-year-olds. You came at 8 o'clock on a
Saturday,
Saturday
yeah.
morning. I was
Bad
like, man,
news.
I didn't go to sleep till probably 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And it's not an exciting test.
Yeah.
So I fell asleep both times that I took it in the reading part. I wouldn't
I
recommend
overslept the second time I had registered and didn't show up.
that. Oh, no.
But the first time I had taken it, I made enough to get into the college I was trying to get into. So I was like,
Wow.
oh, well, all right, I'm good.
Well, I did too. I got into Columbia State.
Yeah.
So
Well, let's go back to the movie. I want
yeah,
to
sorry.
I want to ask you. I think that 8th grade is such a powerful depiction of what the world of certainly a middle school girl, but I even think that it does, because I don't think everything Kayla goes through is like girl specific.
no.
I think it does show.
And it's not middle school specific either.
Yeah.
But lots of the stuff is stuff high schoolers deal
Yeah,
with.
I think there's more of a blur between the two now
Yeah.
than there used to be. But I'm wondering, were there specific scenes that stuck out to you that maybe are particularly powerful, and that if a parent's listening to this, they could maybe glean something from?
Yeah, I think probably like the most helpful thing that a parent could do is go back and look at. Hold on, I told you I took lots of notes.
Oh, yeah.
I want to get this right. It's right at the end. Yeah, when she said, it's emotional for me, honestly, to read it. But she said, "Do I make you sad?" And
Did she say they were dad?
yeah, and she said, like, if I had a daughter like me, then I would be sad. So that's really like that. It's the kind of stuff that I hear a lot.
Was that around the fire at the end?
Yeah. But his answer to it was perfect. Where he said, I'm happy that I get to be your dad. And, it wasn't like she expressed all this stuff and he was like, "Oh, that's silly, you're awesome," and left it. He really stuck in there, and, it wasn't like this girl hadn't won tons of awards or, had a 4.0 and, she wasn't taking honors and AP classes her first semester.
Wasn't the most popular.
No, it became more apparent throughout the movie. And they did a really good job showing this in all the shots that they did. But, she didn't really have any friends.
Mm-hmm.
She was just kind of there, which is for a teenager going to school where you have the same options for the same friends. Unless you move your whole life, that sucks. Like that's your main social setting, and you're alone. So for him to be able to throw out all of her strengths and all of her positive qualities and how he felt about her, and I think the phrasing was just so good. Like, "I get to be your dad." That was, I think, the perfect response to that. And that's something that as a parent we have to remember, the way we phrase, like little things, instead of like, "No, I'm happy I'm your dad." It's good, but it's not, I don't think it's as strong as, "I'm lucky to get to be your dad." I feel like that puts it on another level. I think that part, like any parent could go watch that scene at the fire and be like, that's like I would say like the sort of the gold standard in how to
I think
respond.
her dad really understood the question underneath her question.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
her dad was really able to clock that she was really asking for validation. She was really
Yeah.
asking, do you see me?
Right.
And the answer that he gave, that he thought she was cool, that
Yeah,
he
yeah.
really admired her,
Yeah.
and that he gets to be her dad,
Right.
didn't just say, hey, that's silly, don't think that.
Right.
But it said, not only do I see the things you care about,
Yeah.
not only do I think that they're cool,
Yeah.
but they're the very reason why
Yeah.
I love being your dad.
Exactly.
And I think you're right. Like, I remember watching that scene and just tearing up
Yeah.
so much because
I'm tearing up talking about it.
because you just realize from the whole movie how much she needed that and was
Yeah.
looking for that. And I don't know this, but I think up until that point she was really looking for it from all these other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then in the end, like what you were saying earlier, she came to her dad for it.
Right.
Whereas he certainly wanted to give it for the whole movie.
Yeah.
But in the end, it was her coming with that little tiny question.
Yeah.
And even, I didn't think about this. His response is kind of the same as at the dinner table at the beginning. Maybe she was expecting a 1 or 2 word answer.
Yeah.
And he gave more, but what he gave was like water in the desert to her.
Yeah.
Like she just, and it's shown because she goes to make that last video, and now it's kind of coming from a different place of
it is. Yeah.
Yeah, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
We're going to be able to make this.
Yeah. Yeah. That I think that for sure. And I mean, I'll say like this movie takes place over the course of 2 weeks, and it's probably where things have gotten the absolute worst, and you're seeing the tail end, and things usually don't. I mean, right? Like usually we don't see things are horrible, and then they get so much better over the course of 2 weeks. And life is
it's a
fixed
movie.
forever.
It's
Right.
condensed.
Yeah.
You were getting a slice.
Well, and just to like for any parents that are listening to this, things generally don't happen that quickly.
Yeah.
But there's no manual that you get as a parent that says when your teenager says this is what you should be hearing.
Yeah.
And I think
there's
really,
no Google Translate for it.
No, there's not. There's not. But being able to speak a teenager's language doesn't mean that you're like, man, those shoes are lit. That's not speaking their language. It's when they say things to you that you're able to like, tune out the noise and look at what they're really trying to communicate.
Yeah.
And then that you're able to let them know that you get what they communicate. So those are two real key elements to a relationship with your teenager, I think. But it all starts with listening to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I know people probably think that's like really hippie-ish for me to go, no, you need to listen to your teenager who's chewing you out. But
it's not, because I think that you would say that about any relationship, whether or not you're sitting with a married couple who's in for counseling.
That's what I was going to say.
Two friends that are in or whatever. Yeah, that's a people thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's part of learning how to be present with someone, that while they're speaking, you're not thinking of your to-do list. You're not thinking of what you want to say.
Right.
But you're really present enough to take in what it is that they're saying.
Yeah.
And process that yourself.
Yeah.
To understand it.
Yeah.
There's a couple of scenes that I thought of that I think just communicate so much. What you were saying earlier about kind of that same social scene, I think that the movie does a good job of showing in Kayla the simultaneous desires of wanting to be special and stand out and also blend in. Which is like this weird tension that exists within a teenager, because I want to be invisible, but I also want to be a superstar.
Yeah.
And it's, I think, a natural want. It's in the hierarchy of needs. I want to belong, but it's also that developmental thing of I want my own identity. And both of those are happening at the same time.
Well, and when you mix, when you mix that, like those nerves and anxiety, I guess since I work with anxiety so much, I see things through that lens a lot. But when you mix social anxiety into that, that's like this whole other beast that complicates each one of those problems times 10, right?
Yeah. And then I'm thinking of, I think this was towards the beginning. She's getting out of school. Mm-hmm. She runs into, I think the girl's name is Madison. I can't remember. But the other girl's getting picked up by her mom, and she's having a birthday party. And the mom kind of invites Kayla to the party, but it's clear that the girl doesn't want her there. And then she gets an Instagram message from her later that says, my mom said to invite you to this thing, so this is me doing that.
Yeah.
And it's once again this like tension of I really want to go, but also it really feels like she doesn't want me to be there.
Yeah.
What do I, and I think, it's clear that she's wrestling with that, and she has the opportunity in the middle of it. I think her dad walks in to even say, hey, Dad, what do I, and she doesn't take it. Like she throws the phone. Well, no, she throws the phone when she's looking at something different, but but she does, put it down or shuts him out and that kind of thing. And it's, she's trying to handle this whole thing that she just has no clue.
Right.
Who would, by the way, would have a clue? But she has a resource that she's choosing not to use. And
right. There was some kind of reason at that point that she chose not to, and it wasn't the right time. So if, again, like her dad made the right decision by saying, I'm not going to force you to take help from me on this. I just think so many times teenagers are having that stress, and actually even adults a lot of times, and they have it and it's there and they know they don't like it, but they're not really sure what it is. And you just know you're sitting there with it.
Yeah. One final kind of scene question. Yeah. She has a crush in the movie. He has a very specific music cue that always plays when he walks in.
Yeah.
Before we started recording, I was like, yeah, he gets in the pool and it plays that music and he gets out and he shoots the bird with both hands, and everybody at the party is like, that's a perfect middle school boy right there. They have, what is it, a earthquake or a tornado drill or something at the school where they go under the desk together, and he asks her a pretty explicit question, and she then begins to basically Google how to perform a sex act. And then that's really what causes, she is looking at his Instagram feed in her room. She begins to try to kiss the back of her hand. And when Dad walks in, she throws the phone across the room and it breaks the screen. This is a giant question for such a little bit of time. But is there anything that maybe you could add for parents or even for teenagers that are listening to this about, I don't know, sexuality, about like what was going on inside of her in that moment? Because this guy that she basically had like created this dream idealization of finally gave her some attention. Which is not necessarily the kind of attention that I think any parent would say, I want.
Well, she told him that she had nude photos too that she was saving for whoever would end up being her boyfriend. And I mean, which goes along with this whole thing, right? But I mean, I would say for one thing, talk about sex and don't make it this thing that your kid will go out and find out about on their own, because they will go out and find out about it on their own.
Sometimes they don't even have to pursue it. It just shows up on their door.
Yeah. I mean, it will definitely find them if they don't go find it. And then, the messages that people get about sex and what's healthy and STDs and ability to get pregnant and all of those things. Like, you don't want them to learn that from a 13-year-old, right? You want them to learn that from you. And about, relationships and what's healthy in relationships. So those are things that you need to tell your kid about. So that can help to cut down on, well, I need to be accepted by somebody. I bet if I have sex with somebody, that will help me get a good relationship. Like, they need to know if that's what I have to do to get a relationship, it's probably not a good relationship. Yeah, and what was the rest of the question? I'm sorry.
Was there, considering that scene,
yeah,
is there anything that you could offer, to parents or to teenagers that were listening? Which I realized was a giant question.
Yeah. I think, too, it goes back to a lot of let your kid know the positive qualities that you see in them. So I thought that that scene relates to another scene that happens later where she goes and meets the girl that she met in high school, a girl who was really nice to her and went out of her way to make her feel welcome. And she's riding home with one of that girl's guy friends. And, he's probably what he was attempting to do is commit statutory rape if he had graduated from high school already. But she eventually set a hard limit, set a boundary. And that's what kids will do when they've been modeled boundaries and when they feel confident in themselves. But that comes on the heels of her meeting this girl who's really nice to her, who you could tell she, her self-confidence lifted a little bit and she was feeling better about herself. And then she sets that limit, and I'm not sure that that's the line that they meant to draw in the movie. But I just feel like reminding your kid of their positive qualities, and they'll probably act like they couldn't care less. Or they may get mad that you let them know that. But then there's less of a chance that they're going to feel the need to go tell a guy, here are my positive qualities. I'm willing to send naked pictures to you, and I'm okay with you asking if I'll give you oral sex. To be accepted. To feel good about me.
It's even if they reject your attempt to highlight those positive qualities, it's money in the bank. They're going to remember that you're saying those things about them. Even if in the moment they're like, oh, Dad, oh my gosh. Quit it.
Well, I think of when I was a kid, my grandmother would give us bonds for Christmas, right?
Yeah.
So, it was money in the bank later when I needed more money at 16, when I needed money more than when I was 6. I think that's how long they took. It was 10 years. But $10 would turn to 20. $20 is a lot when you're 16.
It's true.
Or it was 20 years ago when I was 16. But
$20 is a lot right now. I would love to have 20 extra bucks.
Buy a lot of candy bars with that.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, and I don't want to say that. That you want to go tell your kids sex is completely bad and you can never have sex, and unless these are circumstances, because then kids will. What happens?
Well, anytime you tell a kid something's off limits, they're gonna run as close to it as they can get.
Yeah, that must be fun if you're telling me I can't do it. Yeah. See, I think educate about what's safe and what's healthy and what's healthy in relationships, and model what's healthy in relationships,
which is a long-term thing, like we said earlier.
It is. I was going to say there's not a conversation that deals with that. These are long-term investments, which is what most of us knew we were signing up for when we decided to have kids.
Be mindful of what you're modeling.
Yeah.
So as we're wrapping up, I want to ask you, what's something that you've learned from your clients?
So I think that if you don't listen and you don't learn to speak the language that someone is speaking to you, which means you have to get under the surface, then it's really difficult to communicate with them in a way that will have meaning to them. And for someone who is 13 or 15 or 20 years old, you can't go, you need to speak the language that I'm speaking because that's going to help you. I mean, in therapy, it would be awesome to be like, okay, we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z today, and you really need to get this because it's going to help you. I mean, if that were the case, I would see people like, 5 times and we'd be done, and I would like have a line out the door every day. And my job would be so much, probably not as much fun, but so much simpler. So yeah, I think really being able to hear what people are saying under the surface. Wow. and then being able to communicate that you understand that.
So let's say that somebody was listening to this and they feel like they could connect with you really well, and either they want to come see you as a client or maybe bring their kid to come see you as a client. What's the best way they can get a hold of you?
I like all types of communication. So usually my website, which is really simple, is codyhiggs.com, Cody, HIGGS.com. Or you can call, it's 931-626-3278. Yeah, that's pretty much it. You can text if you want to. I'm not, like, I probably won't schedule an appointment through text the first time, but I mean, some people I know, especially again, like if you're dealing with anxiety, like people want to text first.
Sometimes
because
that's safe,
it's much less intimidating than to call people.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, Cody, thank you so much for being on the show today. It has been an absolute pleasure. And
yeah, this has been fun.
Yeah, man. Cool. My love, here we are, back at home. We are no longer the vacation Treeses.
Oh, so sad. I love the vacation Treeses.
It's true. They are great people.
Vacation Leigh-Ann is so much better than regular Leigh-Ann.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you there. Regular Leigh-Ann is a wonderful person.
Thanks.
Slightly less sunburnt than vacation Leigh-Ann.
Yeah, just a little less.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really not a good vacation unless you can wear something that's like, off the shoulder. What's the word I'm looking for? Sleeveless. Unless you can wear something that's sleeveless and have the sunburn lines to make it look like you're still wearing a tank top or sleeves.
Yeah. I mean, that was my experience on our vacation.
Yeah, me too.
There you go.
Strappies right there.
Yeah. Hey, what did you think about this week's episode?
Oh, it was great. And so fascinating. I think Cody's so interesting. And like, I don't think that you have had guests on who kind of specifically work with, teenage boys or like, kids who are typically boys. And I don't think that we've talked about
Rob Fitzpatrick.
Yeah. I don't think we've had such a specific episode on kind of like teenage girls. And I was one of those. So I highly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And I thought Cody was cool. What's really funny is that the outdoor camp that he talked about at the beginning, the only thing that I like wanted to say about that was just, what? Like, what? But then also what? Like, it sounded fun and cool, but then also kind of intimidating and scary. But it sounds like it worked out for him, and he had some people there that really role modeled what he wanted to be later in life. So
yeah,
that's cool. I like that he talked a lot about how you have to model with kids how to set limits and boundaries and like model how to do things. And I think he actually got to this towards the end of the episode. or like at the end of the episode. But this idea, the idea kept kind of coming up over and over again for me of, nobody knows how much you care. No, nobody cares how much you know unless they know how much you care. I think that is especially true for kids, and especially true for teenage kids. That's something like, in my job and in my work, it's dealing with a lot of kids. It's a lot of kids of different ages, and that's, and we are kind of mentors to the mentors. And that's just one of the biggest lessons and one of the most effective lessons for somebody to learn who is either working with a youth or just somebody who loves a kid. Like, it doesn't matter if you want to sit down and teach them that 2 + 2 = 4 and they're failing math and you want to help them and whatever, like, that's all well and good. But if the child doesn't know that you care about them regardless of that math score, then that's not going to sink in. Like, that's not going to matter.
Yeah, and the converse is true as well. If they think that you won't care about them unless they have a certain math score.
Mm-hmm. That's terrible and damaging.
Yeah.
I thought it was really cool, his phone thing, like how he talked about how people will be on their phones and he'll just ask about it or like it. I just think that's the coolest thing, that he's leaning into it rather than, judging or coming down on them or like, anything like that. I just think, especially these days, I just think that wouldn't be, I could see that being a way that people are not successful, is to have a really rigid, way of looking at things when they're in a session with a kid.
Yeah, his stance of, kind of thinking, hey, it must be really important if they're talking with somebody on their phone while they're in here.
Mm-hmm. And he even brought it into relationships a little bit. Like he said, if a girl is saying, oh, I got to text my boyfriend back because he's, la, 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 and then leading into talking about relationships. I don't know why, but that just made me feel really relieved. I think, like, kids having relationships, like youth having relationships, is obviously super common. And I think too often it happens where an adult will kind of brush off a relationship between kids because it's, they're not old enough to drive. They don't see each other outside of school, like whatever it is. But I think more and more, and especially now with cell phones where there can be so much contact outside of like school zones, I just think it's so important to talk about healthy relationships and like what a healthy relationship looks like at that early stage, rather than just kind of be like, oh, they're just kids, it's whatever, until, somebody's 20 years old and they're in like a really unhealthy relationship.
Yeah, that reminds me of, like, if you're not, you and I had a conversation this past week just about intentionality and continuing to build our relationship and build our family with intention, and just kind of consciously deciding what do we want this to be, rather than one day opening our eyes and it's been decided and built, but it was by accident. I think, for any parents or anybody that cares about teenagers, to have those discussions, because if you don't, it is being modeled for them by television, by movies, by the media, and
by their peers. And
that may not be a model that you want them to emulate. But if they're not getting that from you, then I don't know. It's kind of the old if you don't vote, you don't get to complain kind of thing, which I don't necessarily agree with. But in this case, like, if you're not doing the modeling yourself, then
you can't guarantee what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Sort of related to that, I thought, I forgot what you guys were talking about when I had this thought, but I think when it was just in talking about the experience of kids and how they deal with so much during their day and then come home and have an attitude. And it, I think he talked about how in 8th grade, the movie, it depicted really well kind of what goes on in the background for a kid. And it just made me think, I hope, and I don't ever want to assume that I'm remembering accurately what it's like to be a kid. So I do remember my childhood. I remember what it was like to be in middle school. I remember what it was like to be in high school. But if I am talking to a kid now, or if, when we have kids and we're talking to them, I think if you assume that your experience is the same as theirs, things could get really messed up because things change so much. I mean, the phones, like I'll bring up the phones again. Kids just have so much more access to information and each other and all of those things that I think for me to assume that I know what it's like to be a 13-year-old today, it would lead to just me not understanding. And I think, like, I guess you've seen in movies or whatever how a parent kind of needs to remember what it's like to be a kid. Like that's an issue that they have, that they're not remembering what it's like to be a kid and they need to remember what it's like to be a kid. So this just gave me maybe a little bit more in depth of a thought to like, okay, it's not just important to remember what it's like to be a kid. It's also important to recognize that your experience as a kid is going to be different than your kid's experience.
You could remember and it's still not going to match. Yeah.
It's just like, I mean, there's generational things happening between, there's this, everybody talks about like millennials and whatever the older generation is and how they complain about millennials. And there's this whole, misunderstanding and kind of like things are just different. Like the world changes so much and so quickly that it's kind of, I don't know. I feel like this is like a Dumbledore word, but it's just folly to think that you know what it's like to be a younger generation or like that it's the same as your experience was. Whenever she asked her dad the question of like, and I don't remember the question. It was like, are you sad to be my dad or are you whatever? And you guys just kind of went on and on about that, like about his answer and how he really saw what she was really asking. It reminded me of a couple things. I think it reminded me of a moment that I've had with my mom before where I was changing my major in college and I was changing it again, I should say. And she, understandably so, was very scared, thinking that her daughter was just going to like skip around majors or like was ending up in a major that wasn't going to get her a job. And, all the normal
art history.
Very understandable. No, it was social work actually.
No, I know.
And I remember having a moment after she and I had that kind of talk and it was very, I was scared to tell her that I was changing my major and she wasn't super pleased. And I remember at the end of it kind of coming back and just sitting next to her and asking her, are you still proud of me? Cause it just at the core of what was going on, cause she had a reaction to it. I started crying cause I was kind of scared to tell her. And then she had a reaction. It was what you guys talked about. It was this really vulnerable moment where I was asking her something that I just needed to know, the answer. So I don't know. I think it just made me think about how important moments like that are for kids. And I mean, I was in college, so I was a little bit formed, I was already kind of done with the early part of childhood, but, yeah, I just think it's what you guys talked about is powerful. Like listening to a kid's question and trying to actually really listen to what they're asking underneath the question. Yeah, I really liked that. And I liked that part of the movie.
Yeah, I thought it was beautiful.
And then I think the last thing, I think you guys talked about this right after, I think you said how her dad was a resource that she chose not to use. Oh, it's when you guys were talking about her, you know, practicing kissing on her hand and liking the boy, and the boy asking her about oral sex, and you asked Cody just sort of for some insight into how do you help a kid when they're in that stage, and like what do you do when your child is dealing with that. I think she didn't use her dad as a resource, quote unquote, because of a lot of things, but shame definitely being one of them. And I think like what Cody said is just so true. If you don't talk about it, like shame is just going to grow. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why I wanted to point that out other than just to say that I think shame is so prevalent. And I think it for everyone, I don't even think I want to say, especially, you know, preteen and teenage girls. I just think shame is being used in so many different settings as a tool to steer behavior and to steer, you know, the way we look at things. So yeah, I think it's not that she had this tool at her disposal and she chose not to use, you know, this resource. It's that she had so much shame and fear, I think, in that moment. You know, she couldn't bring herself to ask her dad. I just thought that was an important distinction. Like it's not like she had this resource and she was just like, well, I don't need it. You know, it was more than that.
I thought that it was such an incredibly awesome thing to be able to meet somebody who works with young women. And, you know, upon first meeting Cody, little taller than me, shaved head, very fit, like t-shirt, biceps bulging out. And I just thought, oh, I don't know if I would have looked at this guy and said, I bet that guy specializes in working with young ladies. Mm-hmm. But to hear the heart behind the man and to hear the empathy and the compassion and the care that he has for the people that he works with, I was just so taken aback and just so glad that I got a chance to talk with him and to hear about his work and hear about his thoughts on this movie. I thought it was great. Yeah. You and I had seen 8th Grade before.
Yes.
Buy, rent, or pass.
Oh, buy for sure.
Yeah. It's
great. It really is. It's a cute little movie, and I think if you grew up as a girl, then there's probably a lot of things that you'll identify with. I really liked the swimming pool scene. I think that was, for me, one of the most easy to relate to. Mm-hmm.
I think even if you grew up, you know, I used to be a middle school boy, and there was still a lot of stuff in it that I identified with. Just
yeah. I just mean buy. That's why it's buy for me. Is because there's a lot that I
absolutely.
You know.
Cool. Well, we have had quite a busy 3 weeks.
Yeah, we have.
And it is ramping up and semi-finishing up in the next 2 days. And we'll have some things to share next week.
Yeah.
That'll be pretty great. But until then, I think what we can do is say, raise the lights, lower the curtain, and say that for this week, the theater is closed.